The air inside the luminescent jade didn't just smell of sandalwood. It smelled of impending extinction. It was a cathedral of filtered light, obsidian walls, and gold leaf, where the elite of Seoul came to barter souls over vintage wine. At the center of this opulent cage sat Wei Niran. He was a man carved from cold marble and sharp angles, his neck tattoos creeping up toward a jawline that had never known the luxury of a smile. He was the king of the Niran Empire, a man who moved through the world with the quiet, terrifying gravity of an apex predator. Across from him sat Bora, his fiancée. She was the personification of deadly elegance, her diamonds catching the dim light like shards of ice. To the world, she was his devoted queen. To Wei, she was a political necessity. But to Nova, she was a viper midstrike. Nova, 22 and sharpened by years of digital warfare, didn't watch the dinner from a table. She watched from the Shadow Hub, a high-tech server closet hidden behind a fake mahogany panel in the kitchen. She was Wei's ghost, his silent guardian, and his most lethal asset. Through a hidden fiber-optic feed, Nova had seen the unthinkable, Bora meeting with Wei's rival brother, Jingfeng, in the cellar. She had heard the click of suppressed handguns and seen the exchange of a silk handkerchief, the signal for the execution. Nova checked her tactical watch. 60 seconds. The wait was over. She didn't tremble, she calibrated. She grabbed a suppressed pistol and her tablet, bursting through the kitchen doors. She ignored the reaching hands of security, her white silk dress fluttering like a battle flag. She leaned in, her lips inches from Wei's ear, and whispered the 7 words that would ignite a war. Your enemy is sitting at this table. The silence that followed Nova's whisper was heavier than a lead casket. For a microsecond, the only sound was the rhythmic drip of a nearby decorative fountain. Then, the world shattered. Wei Niran didn't ask for proof. He lived by instinct. With a roar of strained wood and metal, he kicked the 2-ton mahogany dining table upward. It flipped like a coin, sending $10,000 crystal flutes and vintage wine crashing into the obsidian floor. The red liquid sprayed across the white tablecloth like a premonition of what was to come. A split second later, the first bullet from Bora's concealed weapon buried itself in the wood where Wei's heart had been a heartbeat ago. Nova down. Wei roared, his voice a gravelly command that cut through the sudden chaos. He pulled her behind the tilted table as a hail of gunfire erupted from the waiters at the perimeter. These weren't staff, they were Jingfeng's hand-picked executioners. The luminescent jade was no longer a 5-star restaurant, it was a kill box. Nova didn't just hide. She reached into her garter, pulled out a flashbang, and rolled it across the polished floor. Crack. The room went white. In that vacuum of light, Wei moved. He was a blur of charcoal wool and lethal intent, rising from behind the table to return fire with surgical precision. Each of his shots found a home in the chest of a traitor. Bora had already vanished into the smoke, a ghost of silk and betrayal. The back exit is compromised, Nova shouted over the ringing in her ears, her fingers flying across her tablet to override the building's internal security. They've locked the fire tiers. We're being boxed in, Wei. Then we go through the heart of the house. Wei replied, grabbing Nova by the arm and dragging her toward the kitchen. Behind them, the obsidian walls were being chewed to dust by high-caliber rounds. The Niran Empire had just officially entered its darkest night, and the only way out was through the blood of the men who had once sworn loyalty. The industrial kitchen of the luminescent jade was a labyrinth of stainless steel, hissing gas lines, and the terrified cries of chefs who had no part in this war. Wei and Nova burst through the double doors just as a squad of tactical mercs entered from the rear loading dock. Nova, the pipes. Wei commanded, sliding behind a heavy prep station. Nova understood immediately. She didn't reach for a gun. She reached for the digital infrastructure. With a forceful tap on her screen, she overrode the pressure valves of the industrial steamers. Hiss! A wall of blinding, scalding white vapor erupted from the floor-to-ceiling pipes, turning the kitchen into a zero-visibility death trap. Wei moved through the steam like a phantom. He didn't need eyes. He had the rhythm of the hunt. Nova heard the wet thud of a blade finding its mark, followed by the heavy collapse of a body against steel. She stayed low, her heart hammering against her ribs, her tablet acting as her eyes through the thermal feed of the room. 2 o'clock, Wei. Low, she hissed. Wei spun, his suit jacket fluttering as he swept the legs of a mercenary emerging from the fog. Before the man could scream, Wei's combat knife had ended the threat. This wasn't a mafia boss protecting a child. This was a general and his chief of staff navigating a burning battlefield. They reached the service elevator, but Nova's screen flashed red. They've cut the lift cables. Jingfeng is trying to drop us into the basement. Then we take the gondola, Wei said, his eyes locking onto the external window washing rig visible through the narrow slats of the kitchen windows. He smashed the reinforced glass with the butt of his weapon. The cold night air of Seoul rushed in, smelling of rain and ozone. Below them, the city was a sea of neon indifference. Above them, the hunters were closing in. They stepped out onto the narrow metal platform, 80 stories of gravity pulling at their heels, and began their terrifying descent into the neon abyss. The descent was a nightmare of swaying steel and whistling wind. Halfway down the tower, the gondola's motors groaned and died. Nova, they've jammed the winch. Wei shouted over the gale. I can't bypass it from here. The signal is being looped. Nova yelled back, her fingers numb from the cold. We have to jump to the maintenance floor. They swung the rig, timing the momentum until they could shatter a window on the 40th floor. They tumbled into the darkness of the cold storage level, a vast, silent floor of walk-in freezers used for the syndicate's massive food distribution network. The air was a brutal -20 degrees. The heavy steel door hissed shut behind them, locked electronically from the outside. Clack. We're trapped in a deep freeze, Wei muttered, his breath coming in thick, white plumes. He looked at Nova. Her white dress was thin, and her skin was turning a dangerous shade of pale. Nova, talk to me. Can you get us out? The lock is a physical-digital hybrid, she shivered, moving toward the internal control panel. I have to spark the solenoid manually. I need your lighter. While Nova stripped the wires with her teeth, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside the freezer. Jingfeng's men knew exactly where they were. They weren't opening the door. They were going to let the cold do the work for them. Wei stood guard by the door, his hands steady despite the frost forming on his eyelashes. He watched Nova work, the way her genius bypassed the most complex encryption in the city. He realized then that he hadn't just saved her years ago. He had built the only person capable of saving him. Almost there, Nova whispered, her fingers sparking 2 live wires together. The magnetic lock groaned, the red light turning a glorious emerald green. But as the door swung open, they weren't met with a hallway. They were met with the barrels of 3 submachine guns. Wei didn't wait. He tackled the lead gunman into the racks of frozen meat, the silence of the freezer replaced by the deafening roar of close-quarters combat. They broke through the maintenance level and onto the rooftops of the lower skyscraper tier. The rain was a torrential downpour now, turning the roof into a slick, black mirror that reflected the pulsing pink and blue neon of the surrounding billboards. There, Nova pointed. A high-speed maglev train line ran 20 feet below the roof's edge. If they timed it right, they could disappear into the city's transit veins. You first, Wei said, firing back at the stairwell door as it was kicked open by a fresh wave of mercs. Nova didn't hesitate. She took a running start, her white dress billowing like a ghost in the wind, and leaped. For a second, she was weightless, suspended against the backdrop of a glowing advertisement for a luxury watch. She landed hard on the roof of the passing train, the metal groaning under her impact. Wei followed, his jump more calculated, landing beside her with a thud that vibrated through her bones. But they weren't alone. From the building they had just left, a black syndicate helicopter rose like a predatory insect. Its searchlight swept over them, pinning them in a circle of harsh, white light. Hold on, Wei yelled, grabbing Nova's waist as the helicopter's door gunner opened fire. The roof of the train disintegrated in a line of sparks and shredded metal. Nova grabbed her tablet, her face set in a mask of cold fury. If they want to play with the grid, let's play. She initiated a massive surge in the maglev's power draw. The train surged forward, its speed doubling in seconds, throwing the helicopter's aim off. But the surge caused a chain reaction. The train was headed for a dead-end switching station. Wei, we have 10 seconds to get inside the carriage. Nova screamed. They smashed through the emergency roof hatch, tumbling into a car filled with terrified late-night commuters. To the world, they looked like two blood-stained demons falling from the sky. To each other, they were the only thing keeping the world from ending. By the time they reached the Niran estate on the outskirts of the city, the sky was a bruised purple. The estate was a sprawling fortress of traditional limestone and modern glass, but the red-lacquered gates were already hanging off their hinges. They're already here, Wei whispered, his voice dropping into a lethal register. They moved through the garden, the scent of crushed cherry blossoms mixing with the acrid smell of smoke. Jingfeng's men had occupied the foyer. Wei grabbed a traditional daisho, a pair of ancestral swords, from a display case in the entrance. Nova, get to the core. If Jingfeng gets the biometric keys to the fleet, the war is over before we even start. Nova headed for the subterranean command center, while Wei stood at the top of the grand staircase. He looked like a shogun of the modern age, a man holding back the tide of a new, dishonorable world. As the first wave of mercs rushed the stairs, Wei's blades became a whirlwind of silver and red. Downstairs, Nova found herself in a different kind of battle. The estate's AI had been corrupted. She sat at the glowing holographic terminal, her face illuminated by cascading lines of red code. Come on, she muttered, her fingers dancing. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for the soul of the Niran name. She triggered the estate blackout. The lights died. The high-tech security cameras switched to thermal. On her screen, she saw the intruders stumbling in the dark. She activated the garden's automated defense pylons, non-lethal but effective, buying Wei the time he needed to clear the foyer. But as she went to reboot the main system, a cold barrel of a gun pressed against the back of her head. Step away from the console, little shadow, a voice hissed. It was Bora. Nova didn't freeze. She breathed. You're late, Bora. I've already encrypted the fleet's GPS. Bora laughed, a sound as sharp as falling glass. Then I'll just take your fingers to unlock it. But Nova had been trained by the best. She leaned back, using the momentum to sweep Bora's arm wide, while simultaneously slamming a kill switch button on her desk. The room didn't just go dark. It began to emit a high-frequency sonic pulse designed to disorient anyone without a dampening earplug, which Nova happened to be wearing. Bora screamed, clutching her ears, and Nova used the opening to bolt. She didn't run away. She ran toward the server hub. If she could merge the estate's AI with her personal tablet, she could turn the entire city's infrastructure against Jingfeng. Upstairs, Wei heard the sonic pulse and knew Nova had made her move. He finished the last man in the foyer and sprinted toward the basement. He arrived just in time to see Nova leaping over a server rack, a digital dragon reborn in the glow of the flickering monitors. Nova, the override, Wei shouted. She threw him a drive. The virus is loaded. Plug that into the main uplink, and we broadcast Bora's betrayal to every syndicate member in the world. Their coup ends the moment their own men see the truth. Wei slammed the drive home. Across the globe, on thousands of secure phones and monitors, the footage of Bora and Jingfeng's cellar meeting began to play. The coup didn't end with a bang. It ended with the silent, collective realization of 1,000 soldiers that they were fighting for the wrong side. It's not over, Nova said, looking at the tracking map. Jingfeng is heading for the Silent Harbor. He's going to flee with the gold reserves. Not on my watch, Wei growled. The pursuit led them to the Silent Harbor, an ancient temple ruin located on a cliffside overlooking the Incheon docks. It was a place of ghosts and gray stone, where the wind howled through the ribs of collapsed pagodas. Jingfeng was there, backed into a corner by the very men he had tried to lead. He held a detonator in one hand and Nova, who had been snatched in a desperate final gambit, in the other. One step closer, brother, and the girl dies, and the gold goes to the bottom of the sea. Jingfeng screamed, his eyes wide with the madness of a man who had lost everything. Wei stepped into the center of the ruins, the moonlight catching the blood on his suit. He looked tired, but his resolve was unbreakable. You think I care about the gold, Jingfeng? You never understood the Nirans. We don't rule for money. We rule for the blood that keeps us together. Nova looked at Wei. She saw the signal. A slight tilt of his head. The gold is already gone, Jingfeng, Nova said, her voice steady. I rerouted the transport ships 10 minutes ago. You're holding a detonator to an empty vault. Jingfeng roared in frustration, and in that moment of distraction, Wei fired. The bullet didn't hit Jingfeng. It hit the stone pillar behind him, causing a cascade of debris that forced the traitor to release Nova. Nova spun, delivering a brutal roundhouse kick to Jingfeng's temple, a move Wei had taught her during the long nights at the estate. As Jingfeng fell, Wei caught Nova, pulling her into the safety of his shadow one last time. The betrayal was over. The traitors were scattered. The king had survived, but he was no longer alone on his throne. The sun began to rise over the Incheon harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. The smoke from the night's battle rose in thin, lazy coils against the dawn. Wei and Nova stood on the cliffside, looking out at the city they had saved. Wei reached into his pocket and pulled out the Niran sigil, a heavy, ancient gold coin embossed with a twin-headed dragon. It was the highest honor of the syndicate, a symbol of absolute authority and protection. He didn't say a word as he took Nova's hand and pressed the coin into her palm. He closed her fingers over it, his grip firm and warm. This isn't a debt, Wei said, his voice softer than Nova had ever heard it. This is an acknowledgement. You aren't my shadow anymore, Nova. You are the foundation of this empire. Anyone who looks at you looks at me. Anyone who threatens you is already dead. Nova looked down at the coin. She thought about her mother, now safe, and her father's name, finally cleared by the evidence she had secured during the chaos. She looked up at Wei and saw not a mafia boss, but a man who had finally found something worth fighting for beyond power. What now, she asked. Now, Wei said, looking toward the horizon. We build something that doesn't need to hide in the shadows. We build a legacy that lasts. 10 years later, the Niran estate was no longer a fortress, it was a sanctuary. The high-tech security remained, but the air was filled with the sound of wind chimes and the laughter of the staff. Wei Niran, his hair silvering at the temples, but his eyes as sharp as ever, walked through the limestone gardens. He moved with a slower pace now, the weight of the crown having been replaced by the peace of a stable realm. Beside him walked Nova. She was a woman of immense power now, the grand architect of the city's digital infrastructure and the undisputed second-in-command of the Niran Legacy. She wore a tailored white suit that echoed the dress she had worn on that fateful night at the luminescent jade. They didn't need to speak to understand each other. They moved in a perfect, synchronized rhythm, the king and the protege. As they reached the edge of the terrace, overlooking the sprawling, peaceful city, Nova looked at the gold coin still hanging from a chain around her neck. They still tell the story, you know, she said. The night the little shadow became the sun. Wei smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Let them tell it. As long as they know that the king only stands because his shadow caught him when he fell. They stood together, two titans of a new age, watching the sun set over an empire built not on fear, but on a loyalty that had survived the fire and come out as pure as gold.